Hi everyone. PPAs are a key route to market for renewables. So today I wanted to take the opportunity to hear from my colleagues Anna Spitzberg, Coralie Laurencin, and Etienne Gabel. I would like to hear their views on how the current COVID-19 pandemic is impacting the development of PPAs across different regions, and what will be the market for these kind of contracts when we get out of the current crisis.
Absolutely, there's going to be an impact on permitting, contracting, construction across the board. But when thinking about the appetite going forward, I think there are about a handful of variables that are worth keeping in mind. One are the underlying objectives aside from cost, and that's the fact that companies were doing this because of their own initiative and consumer pressure to address climate change, and that's not going anywhere. And we also had new markets that were doing this for reliability reasons, especially where load shedding was pervasive. So those underlying objectives still exist. The other aspect is timing. When assessing a project, you're not looking necessarily at just the gas prices today or power demand today. It's about what the project's going to be in 10 to 15 years. And so the value of that project is still there. The third is seasonality, particularly in the largest market, the United States. In the US, and this was very prominent in 2019, three-quarters of transactions took place in the second half of 2019. So there's still room. That's not to say companies' attention is elsewhere. It's not to say that due diligence is going to be harder because you can't get on site. But overall, the most of the transactions that we see wouldn't be occurring right now anyway. The other piece is the type of player. So we've seen an incredible amount of diversity in sectors in the past 2 years. And of course, financial pressure is going to be felt by automotive, by retail, by the upstream sector right now, especially smaller players whose credit offtake standing might be in a very different place. However, there's still a very large chunk that's technology companies, and they've taken a hit on their market. They've taken a hit with consumer goods in regards to supply chain disruptions. But if we look at their trajectory, it's pretty positive because if e-commerce and cloud-based services were in demand before, I think what COVID is doing is accelerating that with everyone teleworking and staying at home. So the overall segment is going to be doing very well. And then lastly, there's a lot more flexibility. Most of these transactions are virtual power purchase agreements, they're sleeved agreements. There's still an electricity supply agreement underpinning them. They're still getting their power supply. So if a project is delayed, it does not mean that it is dead. So there's an upside. So I think those are variables that are helpful to keep in mind when thinking past 2020.
Yeah, I think I might make a point about emerging markets. I think to some extent we're seeing the same trends. In emerging markets, regulated auctions have really been the driver, the main mechanism to bring renewables to market. And on the regulated side, certainly there's been a slowdown. Just this week in Brazil, the Ministry of Mines and Energy decided to put on hold several auctions that were planned for this year. The corporate PPAs were a new trend, and certainly this economic crisis will put a bit of a hit. I think this is especially true because in the renewable space, uh, renewables were serving the same purposes as in the US or in mature markets of climate change targets, etc. But they're also just there to meet demand growth. And this is where demand destruction really plays a big role. And also, a lot of the companies that were signing renewable PPAs in emerging markets were, a bit different from North America. A lot of mining companies, a lot of, industry, primary industries, and these again will be hard hit.
So in Europe, I'll comment on that. I think there's it's very likely we'll see a strong impact, and that's very similar to what Anna was saying for the US and Etienne for emerging economies. I think the first impact is that the market is likely to be frozen for now, and for as long as this uncertainty and certainly these lockdowns in Europe continue. So the market's on pause, and we don't know how long that will last. What this is also likely to change is that really put the focus on the value of structuring your contract very well. Admittedly, this is a black swan event, but for the PPAs in Europe that have been signed without a floor price, then those are contracts that would be in a bit of an unpleasant situation at the moment. So we assume that this crisis will really put the highlight on how you want to structure your contract and just making sure that all of the risks are covered. The third point is that, and I think this is true across the board, but in Europe, we've seen a lot of corporate PPAs being signed by, as Anna said, information companies, or as Etienne said, very energy intensive users. And these guys have opened up the markets. And the view was that they would open up the markets for the smaller guys, for the smaller industrials, or for groupings of smaller industrials. I think this episode or this crisis is going to put that into question. At best, it will push it back, and at worst, it will just take that off the table, because creditworthiness now is going to be extraordinarily important, even more than it was before, and it was important before. The final word on this would be that for renewable development, at least in Europe, nothing beats a government contract. And that's been the situation in the past. PPAs have developed where government contracts have left a role to be played, and an opening for a need for guarantee, for certainty, for visibility. But with this situation, I think the value of government contracts, which we have always highlighted will be the only way that Europe can get to meet its 2030 ambition, is going to come back in full force.